What do I want to be my patient promises? What do I want people to get when they come here? I want to communicate a message that tells them what they can expect when they come into my practice, right?
One of the things that's helpful for people to understand is the distinction between advertising and marketing. Advertising is the vehicle that you use to get a message out there. And so it is part of marketing. Marketing is basically everything you do to interact with your patient.
Welcome back to the second episode of our Apex Dental Partners podcast. Appreciate everybody joining us today. And for those of you who listened to the inaugural episode, we ended that episode by teasing some of the future of what we plan to talk about on this podcast. Plan to add additional members of our team, cover topics that I think are front and center, not only to Apex as an organization, but to many of the dentists we talk about. So today, excited to once again be joined by my partner, Matt Hale, but importantly, our Chief Marketing Officer, Jake Dold. Jake's been with the organization for coming up on Jake's 6 years, I think, which is,
That's right.
hard to believe. But thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for allowing me to join you too. It's an honor.
Yeah, excellent. Well, marketing is always, if not topic number one, certainly, a very close topic or important topic that dentists want to talk about. I think everybody's feeling the pressure of what this industry has become. It's become more competitive. There's more great practices out there, more dentists, just more competition for patients. And I think marketing oftentimes gets dumped into this topic of ad campaigns, new patient counts. But, when you and I talk a lot about it, and I think the three of us more broadly, we talk about marketing, as in much broader terms. It starts early, it goes through that patient life cycle. And so I think it'd be helpful to kick things off and just, kind of frame the conversation for listeners as how you think about your role. You put on your marketing hat. What does that encompass? How should practice owners think about marketing and the different avenues that it can take?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. So for me, this question makes me think a little bit about when we onboard a new office manager. And I spend time talking to them about the role of marketing in their practice. And one of the things that we talk a lot about is their hygiene schedules. And just keeping a good eye on how the hygiene schedule is. We do that because we believe that the doctor side treatment it just flows from hygiene. And while we could market specifically for the doctor side, it's far more efficient to fill the hygiene side. And so we spend a lot of time trying to figure out how we can get hygiene patients into the schedule. And a lot of times as I'm talking to them about that, I think there's kind of this light bulb moment for some of them where they realize this isn't just about new patients. This is a much bigger topic. There's so many different ways to fill a hygiene schedule. And I'm not trying to offload the burden of that on anyone, but it is a team effort and we need to collaborate in that. And I think as we get into this conversation today, we'll probably see that tends to be the topic that we're discussing throughout the discussion.
And Jake, to that point, talk a little bit, but I know people lean to marketing. They understand the value of new patients. They understand the value of building a brand, marketing themselves, growing their practice. But a little bit more before we move on, just why is marketing important? How should people think about both the necessity of marketing, but also just the tremendous opportunity there is simply beyond kind of running a Google campaign?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's helpful for people to understand is the distinction between advertising and marketing. For me, advertising is the vehicle that you use to get a message out there. It's what is being communicated by what means. And so it is part of marketing. Marketing is basically everything you do to interact with your patient. I know it's a kind of an uncomfortable term in dentistry, but it's sales. It's getting people to feel the value of their experience at your practice. And so making sure that we're focused on the whole picture there is really, really important.
It's interesting though. You say, sales is an uncomfortable term, and we hear that from dentists, but I think that's often terms in relation to, quote unquote, selling treatment. It's my impression, but be interested in your view, that I think all the marketing you're talking about is actually designed to reduce the necessity to sell treatment. If we are marketing ourselves, if we are selling ourselves, our team, our experience, our trustworthiness, the treatment acceptance it follows. The necessity to sell treatment is greatly reduced, I think. And so it's interesting you use the word, but when we're talking marketing, we're talking about selling ourselves, our team, our practice. I think, is that how you think about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what it comes down to is trust. And so if you're selling to the point where you've established trust with the patient, then it all comes together. And from the advertising side of it, you're trying to build that trust in the way that you present your website or your social media or whatever the ad is that you're putting in front of them. And then that carries on into the phone call, into that first time they walk into the practice. Everything you're trying to do is to develop a sense of trust that when they come to your office, this patient visits, they're going to get an experience that comes from a healthcare provider, not from some type of retail establishment or something that they're going to have to kind of negotiate the price, or there's all these other scenarios that might not make them feel like they've come to the right dental practice.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Where does that start? I guess from your perspective, I know what we think as an organization, but as you kind of enter that patient journey, that opportunity to start building that trust. Marketing has changed a lot. Advertising, I guess, if you're differentiating the two, has changed a lot over the last 5, 10, certainly 30 years in this industry. But it is a topic that is changing quickly. It's why we feel strongly about building out our own full marketing team and developing that expertise in house to really drive growth, new patient acquisition, just success among Apex affiliated practices. But when you think about setting up a marketing campaign, and really again going back to this idea that from the beginning we're looking at opportunities to build trust, where does that begin in the patient journey?
Yeah. It's interesting. One of the first things I remember when I started working with the two of you was a conversation I had with Matt, where he was talking about wanting to position our teams, our practices, our dentists as healthcare providers. And I just kind of alluded to that in my previous comment. But it's trying to distinguish ourselves from all of the other noise that's out there, all of the discounts of $29 new patient special or things like that. And to me, it all starts with making sure that we stay true to who we are. And as a dentist, it's staying true to who you are. And I guess I kind of throw that back at Matt. This was something that you wanted to make sure I maintained, starting new at an organization that you two had spent so much time developing. Maybe you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that to me, and this kind of gets into, your identity and your marketing message back to the words you used earlier. You've got to have a very clear picture of who you want to be when you grow up, right? What do I want to be, my patient promises? What do I want people to get when they come here? What do I want to communicate a message that tells them what they can expect when they come into my practice, right? And then I want them to get that experience. We all know, right, that expectations are very, very powerful. You can have the same experience at an establishment and that be an experience you're happy with if your expectations align with it. Or you can have an experience that you're either very underwhelmed with or thrilled with, right? Depending on the expectations you went into the situation with. And it's not just good, bad, or worse, right? People have expectations for the type of experience you're going to have. So, we built Apex around the traditional private practice, right? So people have a certain expectation when they go to visit, a private practice. When they go to their neighborhood dentist, they're expecting, a certain environment. And so, the message that we're communicating as we are marketing the practices that we work with, needs to align with that model. And that's, something that's been consistent, from when we started, Jake. I think if you're, it all has to align with your practice vision. So if you have a different vision for your practice, if you're an after hours emergency practice, obviously you need to communicate a very different message than if you're, a hygiene driven traditional private practice. So I think that it's all about alignment at the end of the day, and making sure that the message that you're communicating aligns with, the patient promises that you hold as a practice.
That's an interesting topic, Matt, and maybe this is to both of you, but that message, I think we see a lot of practices and maybe businesses more broadly that struggle with the consistency of that message, that they get caught up in, I saw this and that looked neat for that business or that practice. But talk about how you think about the value and consistency in messaging, what that allows you to do more broadly for kind of brand value that you're building, and why it's important. We talk a lot about the type of patient we are recruiting. We very specifically, as you both alluded to, we are after a patient looking for a healthcare home. Definitionally in our model, and look, some of this is self-serving. Our model is set up economically that we really think about patient value in terms of lifetime value. We invest heavily up front. The expectation of continuity of care, how our staff is compensated, how our doctors are compensated, it all really necessitates that long-term patient retention, but not all models require that. And in some cases, not all models are built on that. Like you said, whether that's emergency, if it's more retail oriented, if you're in a more transient area where just definitionally, no matter how great you are, you have a patient base that's going to be moving every 12 or 24 months. But I'd love to hear both your thoughts on kind of how you think about the importance of just consistency in brand messaging, value, and just understanding who you want to be as a practice or as a provider.
Yeah. Yeah, Jake, I know you're big on consistency and patience, and carrying forward a plan in marketing. So maybe you want to start there, and I can talk about it from kind of the strategy side.
For me, it has to do with not making emotional decisions or decisions based off of emotion. When you are sitting there and the schedule falls apart and you start to panic, not going immediately to try to figure out what kind of shiny object I can find to plug this hole, but to have a plan in place, to have a strategy that you can follow. It's a roadmap that says, okay, this is what we're going to do when X happens. And here's everything we're doing to try to develop that over time so that we don't have these moments where we feel like the ground is shaking and everything's going to fall apart. We're preparing for the future by having that roadmap. And as long as we follow that, or use it as a guide, because there are times where things change, where maybe you're trying to add another doctor to the practice, or you've lost the hygienist, and so you have to make some adjustments, sure. But as long as you can have that roadmap and know that these are the things we're going to do and how much we've already set aside to spend, then you're able to make some of those decisions in a way that is much more calculated. And just thinking of some of the doctors that we've worked with, when we first start working with them, they have these contracts and things that they've signed, and I think a lot of them are the agreement happened.
Panic moves, right?
Yeah, exactly. In that moment where, wow, we're in such need, and now we sign this 3-year contract, and we're stuck in this contract, and we're realizing that wasn't a great deal, and now we're stuck in it, and we're trying to figure out whether we can get out of it, or how do we make the best of the situation we're in. Jake,
I think that points to just a fundamental reason that Apex exists in its core, is that, I think if we step back and say, in total fairness, a lot of that is made at a time where that doctor is overwhelmed. They are wearing so many hats. They've got a lot of other things to do. They've got to see patients. They've got to, hire team members. They've got to cut payroll checks. They've got to, pay their invoices, working with the front team on collections, all of those things that I think when they're getting pressure from their team or maybe feeling it themselves financially on, man, the schedule's light, it forces you to make that rash decision. I think one of the beauties of Apex and just organized dentistry more broadly is that we've been able to devote considerable resources to you, to your team, to the marketing of our practices that can take a longer term vision. I mean, we go through this, it's coming up on that time of year. You're working on setting budgets, marketing plans for every practice for next year. We obviously revisit those quarterly, but I'd be interested in hearing you kind of talk about some of the value you think is there in the ability for your team to all day, every day, you work on marketing. It allows you time, mind share, the ability to take a longer term approach. Just, I'd be interested in your thoughts on why you think that's so valuable to our organization and our supported doctors.
It's so important to be able to give enough thought to a strategy that you can make a good decision. And so often, like you're pointing out, there's so many things competing for the attention of the doctor. They make that decision in haste or emotionally or whatever the competing influences are, that we end up with a situation just like we're talking about. But our team being able to dedicate 100% of the time to these strategies, we're able to massage them and get them to work in different scenarios, different markets, different patient bases. We don't do everything perfectly. Sometimes we find a tactic that doesn't work just the way we want it, and we either scrap it or we find a way to manipulate it to make it work better for our needs. And if you don't have the time or the expertise to spend digging into that, it's a missed opportunity. And I hate to say that our doctors aren't capable of identifying those opportunities. I don't think it's a knowledge gap necessarily. It's an experience in time. You don't have
Data, right?
the data. Yeah, exactly. And you don't have that at your disposal readily available. And when you don't have that, decisions are made that you ultimately end up regretting at times.
Yeah.
I would be, and I'll kind of pose this to both of you because Matt, I know you run the operations side of this business and focus so heavily on, developing and training our team and ensuring that our doctors have the resources, the staff's properly trained and developed for what's about to come next in my question. But Jake, you kind of differentiated advertising from marketing, and so we've talked a lot about advertising. So you're out, you're attracting that patient. I think now all of a sudden we shift towards, and marketing starts there, but the real, I guess, ability to drive value in your practice is then capturing that patient opportunity. So we talk about it in terms of the importance of first impressions. I'll back up and kind of even tie in the importance of call conversion. You've spent a lot of marketing dollars as a doctor to attract that patient. Obviously, not every patient is booking and ready to go. They've got questions. I'd love to hear kind of how you guys think about, and maybe you can talk about some of the things we've done, but the importance of that first patient interaction from that time the call comes in, what we're doing on our end, and maybe how you would advise doctors to think about the importance of that call training to make sure that you are capturing or converting as many of those patient opportunities as possible.
We have spent a lot of time and financial resources on the phones. And I don't want to make this seem like, hey, if you're a dentist listening to this and you're not part of a group, that you have no way of achieving similar results. But we have spent a lot of time on it, and I'd be happy to share some nuggets of information there that might help you. But what we find is that as much as we train about the phones, everyone ultimately ends up falling back into old habits. And so it's something that we have to repeatedly touch on. We have to be training and talking to our teams about phones and how to address the patient in a way that's friendly and warm and inviting, all the time. And there's this cycle where we do a new piece of training, and we roll it out, and everyone gets to view it, and we see our call conversion numbers come up. And then we take a little bit of break, and it comes back down. And it's just the pattern is there. It's clear as day. And so often it's like, oh, we went to the scheduling institute or something like that, and they think that their team is set up for life now to answer the phones properly. And it just takes consistent effort on keeping your teams as top performers on the phones.
Yeah,
And I think
I
what
think
we've seen, sorry, Matt, I'm gonna, I think tee you up here is I think what we've seen is that the truly the only way to have sustainable success here is to really drive it from a culture standpoint, right? Because we know that no matter what you're doing, unless you're a really large practice and are able to dedicate just, resources that only answer, calls coming in, which is extremely rare. And candidly, I think as an organization, we view that, that sort of staffing model isn't always the best. But the reality is that person answering the phone may have every great intention, but they may be in the middle of something else. They may be checking a patient out. They may be working on scheduled treatment. They're on the phone with an insurance payer. There's a lot going on. And so, Matt, I know you've spent a lot of time on kind of driving the cultural element of this, of we call it our outstanding patient experience, but the importance of driving that culture in a practice, and ultimately why it starts with this very first phone call that Jake was talking about.
yeah, I think the culture is incredibly important, right? Because it shapes every interaction. Even if somebody is trying to make an interaction one way or another, ultimately, the way they are perceived is going to be a reflection of how they feel inside. So I think culture is key to this. Awareness that the first interaction sticks is a big part of that, right? So having a culture that where team members feel cared for, they feel empowered to take care of patients, that sets you up for success. And then helping people understand the importance of a first impression, and the importance of that last impression before the patient leaves the office, I think are two things that really play into this. The other thing I would say about this is the importance of data and having data. If you aren't monitoring, for calls coming into the office, which ones were new patient appointments, or new patient opportunities, which ones turned into appointments, which of those appointments actually showed up, right, and turned into a new patient, you really are flying blind on this. So, you don't know if you're doing a good job on the phones or not if you don't have that information to start with. So I think that's a really key part of this. Culture is so important in every aspect of the practice. So I think that goes way beyond this specific question of how do you make a great first impression? How do you capture those new patient opportunities that you're paying for in a lot of instances? But in this specific area, if you want to be effective in capturing those opportunities that are coming through the door, you have got to have visibility to know how many are out there that you're not getting. Otherwise, you really don't know where to work.
Well, I think that's become even more important in a world where, look, you can blow a lot of marketing dollars pretty quick, and especially if you're using third-party marketing, organizations that it's not their money. Look, they're aligned. They're trying to drive, success to your practice. I wouldn't say anything else, but
Well, the reality is, if you don't have the data, neither do they, right? So they only know if you're happy, and if you're happy is based on how you're feeling, right? Which is probably based on what's going on with your schedule or your production that may have nothing to do with what they're doing, right? So it all comes back to you've got to have the data in order to know what's working, in order to be able to iterate on the model. The reality, and we haven't gone into this yet much, is every practice exists in its own world, right? Yes, practices have a lot of similarities, but the demographic, the market you're in, the type of patient base that you have and that you want to have, right, which may be two different things, all those things are different across different practices. And so, if I'm, Joe's marketing agency, I'm going to come in and I'm going to market your practice the way I market, the other 50 that I'm working with, right? And if I don't have information to tell me that that's not working for your practice, well, I can't make adjustments because I don't know that it's not working, right? I just know that maybe you're not happy with it, to which I'm going to try to do things that look like action, that maybe make you happier, but they may or may not actually change the result.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's a great kind of lead into where I'd love to, move the conversation just to get a little more into the details of this full marketing life cycle here. So
Can I just jump in on the culture topic real quick before I want to make a point on that. If you want a good test to see how your culture is, listen to your phone calls, listen to a few of those, and
Yes.
you will, at least your front desk, but that usually it's usually mirrors a lot of what's happening in the practice, and you just listen to those and listen to the tone, how excited someone sounds when they answer the phone. Can you hear that
Yeah.
they're
Are they
smiling or
smiling?
not? Yeah, like, are they just kind of monotone, or if they're rushing through it? Like that is a really good indicator of what the general culture is of your practice.
and I think it's fair to point out that that can be a rather sobering experience. I mean, we've certainly experienced it, right? I mean, as much as we devote to this function, as well as you train and your team works with our practices, we certainly, we have these issues, right? Where it goes back to it's a great place to identify where we need to devote, additional development resources, work on practice leadership, and but I think the point's great that it's a good place to start for doctors.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
absolutely. And measuring the patient experience, right? Back to the data question part of that, that tells you so much. If you have an idea of how your patient experience is and how that compares to other practices, you got a really good start on knowing what are the levers that you need to work on in order to move that.
Yeah, it's a great point. Jake, you started this by talking about this that marketing is much broader than just a new patient campaign or a marketing campaign, social media campaign, and we think about marketing really all the way through that patient life cycle. So I was at a conference this week. One of the speakers told this story, and I thought it's a really good lead in to my question about our focus on this outstanding patient experience. But he talked about, runs a group out of the Midwest, and said that when he meets with his teams, he likes to start with a question of, when you're in a restaurant, who do you think is the most important person in the restaurant? And he said oftentimes that question, the answer is, it's the chef. If you don't have good food, it doesn't matter. And he loves that because he quickly points out that, well, I think it might be the dishwasher. If your plates are coming out dirty, no one's giving your food a chance. And he ultimately kind of relates that back to the importance of every single person in the dental practice. I think a lot of times doctors especially like to believe it's them, and maybe even their team believes it's them. I think we have a view on the importance of every single patient touch point as they work through this, this full patient journey, if you will. We are pretty unapologetic that, our practices are unlikely to be the cheapest. They're unlikely to be the most convenient. And thus it really raises the bar for our doctors and their teams to deliver on that outstanding patient experience. So I'd love just to, talk a little bit, and maybe it ties into that cultural aspect, but how we think about that full patient journey, the importance of capturing patient feedback, and how in turn you kind of take that feedback and ultimately continue to train and develop teams on continual improvement.
Yeah. So there's this whole journey, like you're mentioning. It all starts with a small little segment called advertising, like I was talking about. And obviously, there's a lot of components to the advertising bucket. What we're putting out there on paid ads on Google versus any direct mail strategies or social media strategies, anything like that. And all of that messaging has to be consistent and tie into the type of experience that that patient can expect when they're going to visit the practice. The same is true for what content you find on the website. And then we just talked about the phone calls, what they're going to experience when they're on the phones. After that point, there's only so much that the marketing team can influence. We try to do that as much as possible through training the teams and hoping we can influence that culture a little bit. But then we partner closely with the operations team and try to see ways that we can help that patient experience be outstanding throughout the rest of the time that they're in the practice. Once that's finished and they leave the practice, we kind of step in again and we start sending messages to remind them about appointments or to schedule an appointment that they may have left without scheduling. We also send them a message asking them to rate us online. And then we use that feedback for internal training, of course, but also the public feedback that we get, we use as evidence for why they should come to our practice. And I think that's really key. That's the way that we differentiate ourselves from these other practices that are focused more on price or convenience. To your point, we're not going to win on those in most cases. But where we do shine is in creating that outstanding patient experience. And so we take all of those thousands of Google reviews that we have and we promote those as social proof. Like, this is the type of experience you're going to get when you visit our practice, and here is all the proof of it.
Matt, I'll kind of direct this at you. I think we've spent a lot of time talking about the new patient flow, the new patient acquisition, that patient coming into the practice. That's largely, as we think about it, especially in paid campaigns, paid ads, that's a patient that the social proof, the Google stars, the online reviews are so important because that person likely has no additional connection to your practice yet.
Right.
That's kind of one and a very expensive place to drive new patient flow. There's two other places that we focus a lot of time on, and why don't you talk a little bit about why we place so much emphasis on the internal patient referral, the direct referral from an existing patient, the value we think that carries, but also beyond that, the other that kind of free new patient, if you will, is that patient that's already had an experience with your practice that, for one reason or another, may have fallen off your active recall schedule, and kind of some of the emphasis we place on the value of that patient reactivation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that it's so easy to focus on the new patient count, right? And just be myopically focused on, how do I spend more money on Google, or how do I make my Google spend more effective in raising my new patient count? And that's an important number, right? That matters a lot. I think what really truly matters to how successful, the dentists we work with is what is the total number of active patients they're seeing. We talk about the success cycle and the concept that, really the practice, really runs off of that hygiene. So when you're bringing somebody into the practice, keeping them, in that cycle and having the right number of patients, so that you have the right number of exams, so that you are seeing the right amount of needed treatment and then getting that treatment taken care of for your patients. All of that starts with having the right number of patients in the practice. So the total number of active patients is really what you should care about. And so, as you mentioned, there are, a couple of inputs into that. New patients is absolutely one of them. That's very, very important. On the back side of it is patients that are churning out is the term we use. So patients who were in your practice and for whatever reason are not coming back. So could be they moved away. Could be, unfortunately, they passed away, right? Could be they had a bad experience. All of those things are reasons why somebody might not come back to your practice. So, if you're getting 100 new patients a month, but you're losing, 100 new patients or 100 patients a month, your net growth is zero, right? And that is a much worse situation than if you're getting 50 new patients a month, but you're losing 10, right? And your net growing by 40. So thinking about the total size of the patient base and what the net growth or decline is the important aspect of that. So as you mentioned, right, there's the kind of 100-pound gorilla in the room, right, or 800-pound gorilla in the room of online ads, right? And you've got a patient who's searching, who's looking for a dentist, and being in front of them, having the right online reputation, that is very important. But in that moment, you are targeting somebody who is being targeted by literally everyone else that you're competing against, right? And that person knows nothing about you other than the number of stars, that's showing up by your name. So maybe if you're lucky, they click on your stars and they read, some of your feedback, and they start to develop a sense of who you are, who your practice is. But in most cases, right, they're going off of where are you, what's your number of stars, and where are you relative to me, and where you're presented in that list in order, which has to do with how much you're paying for your ads, right? So you're not setting yourself up, by totally focusing on that for success, because you're at a relative disadvantage to the situation where somebody knows you and or your practice and tells a patient about you, right? That's a much better situation. That person, that potential new patient now knows something about you from someone they trust, which is a whole lot more meaningful than, the number of stars on Yelp or Google or wherever, right? So that is a really, really valuable interaction. It's something I think gets overlooked in the world we live in today. That, of course, is how private practices traditionally grew, right? It was all word of mouth, traditionally. Yeah, you had the yellow pages, you had some channels that look kind of like paid ads in the online world we're in today, but the vast majority of it was word of mouth. So we try to really focus on accelerating that and providing easy pathways for patients to tell their friends, tell their family, right? You've got to create a truly outstanding experience where that person becomes a raving fan, and they are somebody who's going to tell friends and family. And then you have to make it easy for them to do that. And that's, of course, what you're talking about here. Jake has come up with a program that, gosh, we've been doing it 3, 4, maybe 5 years now, Jake.
Yeah.
A while,
I think
right?
from the beginning, almost day one.
Yeah, almost. That really is effective in helping team members to have that conversation of, hey, we'd love to help your friends and family. Making it easy for patients then to make that referral is a really effective way to drive to put yourself in a situation where you're at an advantage because you've got somebody that knows you, knows that you're great, and is telling somebody who trusts them that you're great.
Yeah, you said it already, Matt. It's trust, right? Like we've
Right.
talked about it earlier in the conversation. It's that trust that makes the patient just so much better for the practice.
Yeah.
We don't need the social proof because it already happened organically.
Right.
And now they're going to be a much more loyal patient. They're going to accept more treatment, and they're going to have a greater propensity for referring beyond that because
Right.
they were referred. And so that is a big component of our marketing strategy is how do we leverage this resource that we have, which is the word of mouth? How do we improve upon that beyond what already exists in the practice?
Right. Yeah. And then the other part is the reactivation, right? So that element I think is really important and easily overlooked because you do have patients who, have a life event going on that they drop off the schedule. They're still around, but they're no longer, on your schedule, and they go dormant, right? And obviously that's a terrible thing for their oral health. It's also a terrible thing for your practice, right? Because to you, that's no different than them moving away or otherwise being gone. So having the right strategies to engage those patients and get them back in the office in a way that's that fits right with your marketing message, fits with your practice vision, is really, really important. So, if you're a practice like the practices we work with, that is, a traditional private practice hygiene-driven model, who is, a high trust fixture in the community type of practice. You don't want to be blasting out messages saying, "Hey, come in again, and we'll give you a 20% discount," right? You also, don't want to not be reaching out to those patients. So I think coming up with a reactivation strategy that fits with your practice vision, fits with your marketing message is a really important part, and making sure you're using that and using it effectively. Again, back to measuring these things, to get those patients back in the books and really prevent them from being churn that's bringing down your patient base.
One of the things that both of you have mentioned over and over again is kind of data. I know that's a term that probably makes a lot of people's eyes glaze over pretty quickly. We as an organization rely heavily on data. We love data. We love to understand kind of nuances of every aspect of our practice. But Jake, I'd be interested in just hearing you talk a little bit about why data drives many of the decisions you and your team make, and how maybe you utilize that data to better understand the results, or perhaps lack thereof in some cases, to ultimately design marketing plans and really just drive this marketing team forward.
Yeah, there are too many decisions, and we've talked about already, that are made emotionally or off of a gut feel, and then unfortunately don't get tracked, don't get measured. And so you don't know how good something is doing. Again, going back to when we onboard a new practice, and we have this contract or something, and say, okay, how is it? Is it getting you anything? Are you seeing new patients from it? And they're like, well, I don't know. Like,
Right.
okay, well, the front desk has mentioned a couple people from it or something like that. That doesn't help us. That puts us in a really tough spot if we were to make decisions based off of just kind of a gut feeling. So instead, we're very intentional about the strategies that we're going to implement. They may start with kind of hey, this is a trend that we're seeing in the industry, or we've heard about this tactic, or we've brainstormed this solution, and then we implement it on a small scale so we can test and modify and measure, and then analyze off of that data. And so we're able to see all this information and then extrapolate that to more practices and implement tactics that have a proven track record of working. That doesn't mean they're going to work 100% of the time, but I sure would prefer to bet on something that we've seen works than trying something that we've never tried before and maybe heard from at a conference that this is a great new thing, but we don't really know how to implement it at our practice.
Yeah, that's I think well said. We've talked about so much today, and we're probably just skimming the surface of each. I think probably what Matt and I are realizing as we go through this, and I think would probably be helpful to those who listen, is to spend a few future episodes on diving into some of these individual aspects, what we're truly doing, how we're thinking about this new patient referral program, how we really go about patient reactivation. What are some of our strategies and tactics for driving that new patient flow through the advertising aspect of marketing, and maybe even some of that, phone training tips and tricks that we do. So I certainly want to devote more time to that in future episodes. But as we kind of wrap up here today, if you were to give, that private practice owner, that private practice dentist, a single piece of advice, I know I'm boiling a whole lot down to one, but what piece of advice would you want to leave them with today?
Yeah, fortunately, I did have some time to reflect on this beforehand, so I've got an idea. And it comes down to being patient and being consistent. So we've talked about it a little bit today. I think it's kind of been the trend of the conversation. There's lots of things that come up in the practice. There's lots of fires that happen. There's payroll issues or HR issues or lots of patients or not enough patients. And if we let emotions guide our decision-making process, then the chances are that those decisions aren't going to be made in a way that results in the type of output that you want. You're not going to get the type of results you want. But if you have a plan and you're consistent with it and you're patient with it, then you'll see the kind of results that you want. The caveat is, just because you're patient doesn't mean that you have to maintain it perfectly. You have to be nimble enough to make adjustments to it, but do those in a measured approach, and you'll see the success start to come through.
We appreciate it, Jake. Thanks for joining us. I know I'm sure you've got a dozen other things on your schedule today, but appreciate you joining us. Appreciate you sharing some of the insights of what you and your team work on. And Matt, unless you've got some final sign-off words, we'll kind of wrap up this episode and have to figure out who's going to join us for the next one. But always exciting to dig into some of the subject matter experts that we have on our team and just give people an insight into how you think about the world and what you and your team are working on.
Thanks for joining us, Jake.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.